and today we have Assistant Professor of Philosophy for the Harriet Wilkes Honors College, Miss Ashley Graham Kennedy. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Professor Kennedy has actually undertaken a grant with PGHR, and she's spent some time on a research trip in Myanmar. We have some questions about that, some questions about your background. So let's start with your educational background. Can you tell us a little bit about your research and?
Yeah, sure. So I guess a common thread in my research interest is problem solving, and my academic journey started actually with astrophysics. As an undergrad, I studied astrophysics. Shortly thereafter, I took a job at NASA and became interested in philosophy, actually, while working at NASA. That's a long story I won't get into.
Okay, sure.
And I ended up completing a PhD in philosophy. After that, a postdoctoral fellowship in bioethics and philosophy of medicine. And my current work is in global health ethics, as well as biomedical ethics more generally.
Okay, a very diverse educational background and professional. That's very exciting. So, what drew you to the issue of child labor in Myanmar?
Yeah, so I saw this issue firsthand when I visited Yangon in the summer of 2015. And it's interesting because in Myanmar, child labor is not hidden. It's there for everyone to see. And seeing children working on the streets, in tea shops, on construction sites, it really left an impression on me. And it wasn't long after I got back to the U.S. That I saw the call for the Peace, Justice, and Human Rights Initiative grants. And I thought, maybe this is my chance to be able to look into this issue further. And so I applied and I got that grant, and that's how it started.
And you got your start. I've seen the video which you've produced. It's up on Vimeo. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, I'm not the producer. I'm working with the filmmaker, but
right.
Yes, yeah.
But it's an excellent video. And before we go into kind of where the project's headed,
Yeah.
what was the experience like for you? Is this your first time in Myanmar?
So it was my second time in Myanmar. The first time was on a visit. Actually, I stopped over there because I was teaching in China that summer.
Oh, I see.
So I saw the problem there. I didn't really think I would necessarily go back and research it, but when I saw the PJHR
right.
call for grants, I did. So I've traveled a lot to over 31 countries, but I would say that this was the most intense experience that I've ever had. So I spent a month in the country traveling around, visiting child laborers and their parents in their homes and talking to them through a translator. And I've seen areas of poverty and hardship before, but to be there and to live there, even briefly, really was something that made the problem seem very, very real to me. So, on the one hand, the problem is dire. It's deep and it's more complex than I thought initially. So it's not just about poverty. It is about poverty, but it's also about a broken education system and some systematic injustice. And it was difficult to be there and to interview people and then just have to walk out the door of a hut and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to fix this today, but to remind myself that the point was to go to learn some things, to try to come back and get more people involved, so that we can hopefully solve the problem. And it's not completely hopeless. It's a dire problem, but while I was there, I was able to meet several NGO workers and also United Nations workers. They're working on the problem, and they're beginning to make headway. So I feel hopeful that there can be change.
It sounds challenging, but it sounds like that may be what attracted you to the
I
situation.
think, well, like I said, in my varied academic interests do have a common thread, and that's I've always enjoyed problem solving, whether that's solving a physics equation or trying to look at an ethical issue and see if I can attempt a solution. So I guess I'm not afraid of difficult to solve problems. Of course, I know that I can't solve them myself, but the idea is that to bring others on board, then sure, we can make a difference, I think.
And that's what you're doing. So what is the next step in the project that you're working on?
Yeah, so the project has two parts. The first part is an academic paper that I'm working on that tries to lay out what are the reasons for this issue in Myanmar. So of course there's poverty, there's also problems with the education system, other problems as well. And the second part of the project is this documentary that I'm hoping to make together with a filmmaker based in DC. So we are in the grant stage right now. We're applying for grants. And pending funding, we plan to go back to Myanmar in December, this December, and film at some of the places that I visited already. And we have in mind to tell the story of child labor in Myanmar through the eyes of three people there. One is a child who's working to support his family. Another is a teacher who is working in this education system. And the third is an NGO worker who has really devoted his life to try to change this issue. So that's the idea, to speak to the academic community with the paper, but I really felt very strongly when I was there this December that, well, look, I mean, academics read academic articles and
Sure.
no one else does. So to really get the word out, it was important to try to bring this issue to the attention of the international community, to a larger community than just academia. And that's the idea behind the documentary.
Through the documentary, and you'll have three perspectives kind
Yeah.
of interwoven, so you'll
Yeah,
see
that's the idea.
nuance of the issue.
Yeah.
So.
And again, I'm not the filmmaker, so I'm not going to be doing the filming. But I'm very lucky to have someone on board who's done quite a bit of work with short films and documentaries. So we're excited about it. Waiting on the funding.
And we look forward to it, and you'll get it, I'm sure. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of what your on-the-ground experience was? What was it like living among these people, seeing their day-to-day challenges?
Yeah, it was difficult because no one likes to watch someone else suffer. So I definitely had to remind myself, why am I here? You know, I met one boy who was 16. He had been able to stay in school. And I met him in his home, which was a hut with no electricity, no running water, and it was built on stilts over 4 feet of sewage. And, you know, the sounds and the smells, you know, are still
I can't imagine.
in my mind. But in any case, he was someone who was able to stay in school long enough to take the high school exam, which is required at the
Which
end.
decides all.
It decides everything. It decides
Yes.
too much. So if you don't pass this exam, you are not able to apply for any jobs other than labor jobs, like working in a factory or
So essentially the
couldn't
jobs
even be
they've
a
had
taxi driver.
since they were children.
That's right. So, and something like 85% of students don't pass this exam because the quality of public education is very poor. If you, there are some organizations such as World Vision that are running free private schools in the country, but they don't count as school according to the government, and you are not able to sit for the high school exam if you go to a private school. So that's something that should change, I think, for sure. So this exam does decide everything. You can't be a store clerk, you can't be a taxi driver, you can't do anything other than hard labor jobs if you don't pass this exam. And this boy did not pass his exam. And, you know, I sat there cross-legged on the floor of the hut with him as he told me this. And I thought, that's, I think, the moment when I realized that this problem was deeper than just poverty. It's not just that people are poor, they are poor. But even when they're trying to escape from the cycle of poverty, for example, by trying to get an education, it's not always working.
Of course.
The education system isn't very good, and there are some, what I think are systematic injustices in the system. Because if you can't even be a store clerk without passing an exam, that 85% of the people don't pass, and only the ones that pass are the ones that are able to pay a tutor after school.
I was kind of curious about this, actually. What should we call Myanmar? Should we call it Myanmar? Should we call it Burma?
So pretty much everyone calls it Myanmar now. And Burma, it was the name that was given during British rule. And now Myanmar is the preferred name for various reasons. Also, the term Burmese is not used as widely as it was because that refers to only one ethnic group in Myanmar. but there are many, I don't even know how many, there are many ethnic groups in Myanmar. So I noticed that they'll say, instead of Burmese language, they'll say Myanmar language, or they'll say Myanmar people instead of Burmese people.
How does your astrophysics background at all relate, or how did that spark an interest outside of the problem solving, which you alluded to? Does that figure
Outside
in
of
any
that?
way?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think yes and no, right? So I'm not, writing any equations about how to solve child labor in Myanmar. But I don't know. I mean, I guess in terms of problem solving, also in terms of intellectual curiosity and just wanting to know and wanting to understand, that's what's always driven me. So whether that's physics or ethics, to me, is not so different. To most people, that sounds crazy. There's a huge difference between astrophysics and global health ethics. But to me, it's not. It's about understanding and making recommendations for change when that's needed. So, in my mind, it's not a large divide. I
You're
realize
proposing
that
a unified theory. I understand.
Perhaps.
And
yeah.
you host an ethics bowl on campus, is that right?
Yes, I co-host with Mark Tunick, who is also at the Honors College. We do this once a year, and students form teams and they debate ethical questions. It's a lot of fun. Faculty submit the questions, and the students are not allowed to know what the questions are ahead of time. We have a panel of judges, and it's good. I think that some of the questions are real, actual cases, and some of them are made up. But it really gets students thinking and gets them excited about ethical issues.
Interesting. Have you brought any of your educational approaches to Myanmar, or can you envision anything? I mean, you've mentioned the roadblock of the exams.
Yeah.
And that even though they could receive these, let's say, an NGO opportunity to learn, if the school is not accredited, that's a fundamental roadblock. But is there a different way that these children could be taught that might be able to help them rise to that level?
Yeah, so, I think they should probably do away with this exam entirely. I'm not sure anyone's going to listen to me on that immediately, but it seems to be completely unnecessary. And I met some people in Myanmar, actually some people that have worked with the UN and Myanmar for many years, who think that this is not an accident.
Of course.
This is purposeful oppression. Maybe it is, I don't know. But either way, I think that needs to change. That this exam is clearly holding people back. And anyway, from what I hear, it's in Myanmar language, so I couldn't read the exam. But from what I hear, it requires a lot of memorization, no problem solving at all, no critical thinking, and so you just have to memorize pages and pages of information, and then you can pass this exam. So it's not as if it shows that you've learned something or shows that you'll be good at some sort of higher level job, but it's just this barrier that's in place, either accidentally or purposefully. Either way, it is a barrier, and I think it needs to go.
So the exam won't even necessarily discover exceptional talent in terms of capability, academic achievement.
Absolutely not.
It really rewards a child who is able to attend classes regularly, essentially, or have extra time to study. Or
no, someone who is able to pay for after-school tutoring.
When it comes down to it.
Yeah.
So you think even if these children weren't working, that educational system is failing them to that degree?
Yes. Yes. And the question of whether or not this is purposeful is also interesting. But like I said, either way, I think that's something that needs to change. And, there are organizations like World Vision and others who are there in Myanmar who are running schools anyway, even though they know that the students won't be able to sit for the exam. And some of those schools are really good. And I think it would be great if they were allowed to count, so to speak.
They could be accredited in some way.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure.
Yeah.
What is your goal? What is your best case scenario outcome for this project?
Yeah, so the larger goal, of course, is to play a part in the solution to this problem. So child labor in Myanmar is a problem. People are suffering because of it. And the idea was not just to go and say, oh, this is interesting, and then walk away, but actually to try to play a part in the solution. And so that's the idea, like I said, behind the two phases of this project, the academic article as well as the documentary, is to attempt to play a part in the solution by bringing others on board. And I think that if people see this issue, some of them might become interested in helping to solve it. So that's the idea. And I do have a dream of seeing change in Myanmar, and I hope to see it become a country where children don't have to go to work when they're 8 or when they're 11, but where they can stay in school and pursue their dreams. And I met a mother when I was there who sends her 8-year-old son to work every day at 5:30 in the morning, and he comes back at 7 o'clock at night. He's 8. So, I have a 7-year-old, and I was just thinking about that while I was there, that she says he doesn't want to go to work. Of course he doesn't want to go to work. He's 8 years old, and he spends all day on the construction site carrying sand. But he doesn't want to starve. He doesn't want to see his family starve. So the goal is that one day, hopefully not too many years down the road, things will be different.
Well, we certainly wish you the best of luck with the project,
Thank
and
you.
we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very
having
much.
me.